Welcome back to Newslink. So hundreds, maybe even thousands of motorists have been unable to renew their license discs or cards. This was all due to unpaid traffic fines. But many motorists say they were not aware of this, and it's the only duty of the Road Traffic Infringement Agency to inform drivers of infringements, but that was not done in this case. Now, the Organisation Undoing Tax Abuse says motorists can't be punished for the agency's incompetence. The order has now been temporarily lifted. So let's get more from OUTA Stefanie Fick, who joins me now to move this conversation forward. Stefanie, a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time. It seems that your call has been ringing non-stop. This from motorists saying that unfortunately, they had been unable to renew their license disc because of these fines that they were not made aware of. Take me through what exactly has been the problem here.
The problem is, first, let me say, they can never ever refuse you renewal of any license if you only have outstanding fines. The problem, however, comes in when those fines are converted into what they call enforcement orders. Then they can stop you from renewing any of your licenses. Now, what has happened is that all of a sudden, a lot of motorists would, if they go to renew their license, will see that they have enforcement orders. And this is the problem. It appears that a lot of the older fines, and we're talking 2019 fines, that was converted to enforcement orders. And I'm not talking converted into enforcement orders in 2019. It was very recently converted into enforcement orders. So there's quite a few problems. Firstly, it appears that some motorists didn't even get their original fines. It can be that they ignored notifications, but let's accept they didn't get it. And then secondly, the problem is, unfortunately, you can't convert an enforcement, in other words, infringement notice, in other words, a ticket, traffic ticket, just into an enforcement order. There has to be a process, and we are worried that that process also hasn't been followed. So thank goodness the RTIA listened to us, but also various other organizations that were unhappy about the process and said while they are investigating these complaints, they have lifted the block, because physically, or in terms of computers, when you go to a licensing authority, you are unable. I think the clerk is unable to renew your license if there's an enforcement order.
Yeah, it's good news that the block was lifted, but was there an explanation granted as where the stumbling blocks were with regards to that process that was meant to be followed by RTIA?
I have to say, I would love for RTIA in this type of conversations to be here, because we fundamentally disagree. We are of the view that the legislation is quite restrictive in the sense that you have a certain amount of days to react to an infringement notice. Then they have to send you a courtesy letter. And a courtesy letter is, you know what, infringer, you have a traffic fine. You haven't dealt with it yet, but please, you need to deal with it. So it's a reminder for a motorist that, you know what, there is a problem with something there. And only then can they convert it into an enforcement order. And we are also saying you can't take a 2019 infringement and only convert it now, 4 years down the line? That is not what, even the court has said in the fines for you matter, a very important matter in this case. So I think, except for the fact that RTIA is saying, but they did follow the processes, we are of the view that from the signs that we've seen or the cases we've seen, that's not the case. So they are investigating this, and as said, that this lift will be there until they finish the investigation. How long that's going to be is unfortunately unknown, so people just need to be vigilant. And please, let me end off by saying, before you go to renew any of your licenses, check whether you have any outstanding enforcement orders, because you're just going to be frustrated. Yeah. And maybe, it will give you an opportunity to deal with it before you stand in a queue.
Absolutely. But also I think it's equally important, Stefanie, as you mentioned before, to understand the process that was also meant to be followed by RTIA, right? Because that will then allow you to know if this is actually an informed decision being made here or just some sort of a flawed system. For example, 32-day notice is what's supposed to be given to a motorist timeously, so to comply with that process, right? But if then that enforcement order is granted and, the motorist wasn't given that opportunity to comply with with, the fine, then are you saying the enforcement order could be deemed unlawful and invalid?
We are of the view that it is unlawful and invalid.
Okay.
RTIA, I think because they are sitting with an enormous amount of numbers out there, we're talking about not thousands. I think you're probably talking about millions of tickets that are generated and has now been converted into enforcement orders. They are of the opinion. Now, in the legislation, it makes provision for what they call a revocation application or a revocation order. So what it means is it's that enforcement order gets turned around, but you need to apply as the motorist. So you need to approach RTI saying, listen, there's some mistake. Now, this is very technical. We believe that if you converted a ticket into an enforcement order unlawfully, you didn't follow the process, why does a motorist have to do a revocation? But I'm going to assume that that's also what they are investigating. But in the meantime, if you do see an enforcement order, it depends on the level of confrontation that you are ready for. Firstly, they can't stop you from renewing a license. That's point number one. Whether you have outstanding fines, that has never been part of the process. But if you have an enforcement order, you should be able to still renew your fines. But if you don't want to go through all of that, maybe do a revocation and say, listen, this is not my ticket, not my car. I have no idea. This car's not registered on my name because e-notice is a bit of a problem. Yep. There are duplicates out there, etc.
Are you at all concerned about the administrative processes that could come up with the OUTA Amendment Act here when it's rolled out? I mean, if this are the current administrative gaps that we're seeing just with the RTIA and the current auto system, do you have concerns as OUTA in terms of how they're going to roll out the Amendment Act?
I hate, that one is always critical about new legislation with government, and I don't think it's a secret. We did take the R2 legislation and specifically the Amendment Act to the Constitutional Court, but the Constitutional Court said it is constitutional. But from a practical point of view, we've always been worried because if you sit with this type of problem, where I want to say, all of a sudden there's a lot of enforcement notices and you do not know whether they followed the process. There is a worry that if this is rolled out nationwide, it is going to create problems. And what we also should remember is we are now just discussing enforcement orders. Once the whole system, the whole R2 Act is out there, you're also talking about demerit points and what it will create. And let me just pause there for a minute. This is not about people committing crimes, because I do believe that the criminal is not going to go to the licensing center saying, listen, I want the license for my stolen motor vehicle. I think generally people are law-abiding citizens. And if they know about a ticket, that they will do something about it. If you're guilty, you will pay it. But then you get a discount if you pay it early enough. But then to come back to the rollout, if you now also have to face the whole demerit point system, if you cannot trust that the process is working and it's working in the best interest of, the motorists, then it does create a distrust. And then you have to worry that the RTIA may not be able to deal with just the sheer amount of administrative processes that they will have to deal with if this goes out nationwide.
We'll leave it there. Stefanie Fick, thank you so much for joining me. OUTA Stefanie Fick, regarding, of course, the now lifted block, just in terms of enforcement orders against drivers with outstanding infringements. So please make sure that you also check your NATIS just to see if there are any fines that you need to comply with and pay up to date. And however, you could have a seamless, moving forward there just in terms of renewing your licenses. And I've seen some motorists have been going through some stumbling blocks there with the RTIA. But thankfully, we know now that announcement about the Road Traffic Infringement Agency saying they've temporarily lifted the enforcement order block against drivers with outstanding infringements.